You're listening to The Harmony of We, a space for remembering what we already are together. I'm Greg Kuiper, counselor, author, and fellow traveler in this ongoing field of being human. This podcast isn't about fixing. It's not about getting relationships right. It's about coming into resonance with yourself, with each other, and with the presence that lives in between. This is where the book Relationship, The Harmony of We continues, in breath, in story, and in shared awareness. Welcome. I'm glad you're here as we continue our exploration of the harmony of we. Today we're going to talk about emotional awareness, the gateway back. In the last episode, we explored the illusion of the autopilot, how the patterns we learned early in life begin running quietly in our relationships, often without us even noticing. Two people meet, they fall in love. They're drawn to each other for reasons that feel mysterious at first, a certain warmth, certain energy, something that feels familiar in the body. An attraction that pulls them together. The space between the we is open and unencumbered, free. It's a beautiful, exciting place. And slowly, over time, their lives begin to intertwine. They start bringing themselves into the relationship, and not just their hopes and desires, but they're bringing their histories. Two nervous systems, two emotional landscapes shaped long before they ever met. Two sets of learned responses to closeness, conflict, disappointment, and fear. And before long, something begins forming between them, a shared rhythm, a dance. At first it's subtle, barely noticeable. One person reaches for connection. The other pulls back. One tries to explain what they're feeling. The other goes quiet. One voice grows louder. The other retreats. And after a while, the dance begins repeating itself. Not because either person wants it to, and not because either person is trying to hurt the other, but because the patterns are familiar. Because each nervous system is responding to something it learned long ago. It is protection put in place in a time where that protection was needed, even welcome. Nervous systems are reactive in that protection. And when that response is present, it is automatic. Over time, it can start to feel almost inevitable. Like the relationship is flying itself. The same moments unfolding again and again, the same misunderstandings, the same protections, and the same reactions. As if something underneath the relationship has quietly taken the controls, and it has. The autopilot is running. So the question becomes, how do we wake up inside the pattern? How do we interrupt the autopilot and return to choice? The doorway is something both simple and surprisingly difficult. Emotional awareness. And sometimes the clearest way to understand emotional awareness is to watch what's happening when it's missing. When people hear the phrase emotional awareness, they often think about naming feelings. We look at identifying triggers, talking about what happened. And those things are helpful. But too often it's surface level. Emotional awareness begins somewhere much deeper. It begins before words, before language. It begins in the body, in our physical presence. Because before we ever understand an emotion, we feel it. The sensation of a tightening in the chest, a heat rising in the face, a sinking sensation in the stomach. The body knows long before the mind does. But many of us have learned early on to brush by those sensations and not to stay with them. We learn to move past them quickly. Shortcuts. To analyze, to explain, to fix, to think, and to overthink. Or to shut them down altogether. Maybe anger filled the house quickly. Voices rising, doors slamming. You learn to scan the room before speaking. What's alive in here right now? Maybe sadness lingered without comfort. Tears that no one quite knew how to hold. So eventually, you stopped showing them. Maybe fear had nowhere to go. There was no space to say, I'm scared. No place for that feeling to land. For others, emotions simply weren't welcomed. You might have heard things like, stop crying. Don't be so sensitive. Just get over it. Why are you making such a big deal out of this? And slowly, something inside learns. Not through words, but through experience. The nervous system adapts. It protects. Instead of staying with emotion, we begin moving away from it. We intellectualize. We analyze what's happening instead of feeling it. Or we distract ourselves. We keep busy. We become the fixer, solving problems before feelings can surface. Or we become the one who keeps everything calm, the peacemaker in the room. Not because we were doing something wrong, but because our systems were learning how to stay safe. When emotional awareness fades, something subtle begins to happen in relationships. We start reacting before we understand what we're actually feeling. We start reacting before we understand what we're actually feeling. The irritation shows up as criticism. The hurt shows up as withdrawal. The fear shows up as control. And because the reaction comes before the awareness, the other person never sees the real emotion underneath. They respond to the reaction instead. And suddenly both people are defending themselves from something that was never the original feeling. Let me share a small moment. A couple is sitting on the couch late in the evening. The house is quiet. She says softly, "You seemed really distant tonight." He responds almost immediately, "I was just tired." But she doesn't relax because what she was actually feeling was loneliness. So she says again, "It just felt like you weren't really there." Now his shoulders tighten, and suddenly irritation enters his voice. "I said I was tired. Why does everything have to turn into something?" At this point, the moment is no longer about dinner. It's no longer about being tired. Two reactions have collided. Underneath her reaction is something tender, loneliness. Underneath his defensiveness is something equally human, pressure. The feeling that he's already failed. But neither one paused long enough to feel these emotions. So the reactions took over. Now, imagine the same moment unfolding a little differently. She says, "You seem distant tonight." He still feels the tightening in his chest. The same impulse to defend rises, but this time he notices it. He feels it in his body and he pauses. And he says something slightly different. "I think I'm feeling really overwhelmed today." And I didn't realize how quiet I became. Now something shifts because she hears him and her voice softens. "I think I just missed you tonight." Suddenly, two reactions dissolve into two emotions, and the moment becomes human again. Emotional awareness doesn't prevent emotion. The feeling will still come, the surge in the chest, the tightening in your throat, the quick rise of irritation or hurt or fear. Emotional awareness doesn't stop that. What it does is slow the reaction. Slow the reaction. It creates a small space between what you feel and what you do next. Just enough space to notice what's actually happening inside. You begin recognizing things that used to pass by too quickly. You start hearing yourself say things like, "I'm not angry, I'm hurt. I'm not withdrawing, I'm overwhelmed. I'm not trying to control this, I'm scared." And those small recognitions begin to change something important because when we speak from the emotion underneath the reaction, the conversation shifts. Hurt sounds different than anger. Overwhelm sounds different than distance. Fear sounds different than control. And the other person can feel the difference because emotions invite connection. They open the door to understanding. Reactions, on the other hand, often invite defense. They tighten the space between people. And before long, as you know, two reactions are arguing with each other, while the real emotions underneath remain unseen. Let's try something small for a moment. Think about a recent interaction where you felt yourself react. Maybe it was irritation, maybe disappointment, maybe a moment where your voice sharpened or you pulled away. Just bring that moment to mind. Now pause. Notice what happens in your body as you remember it. Is there a tightness somewhere in the chest, the jaw, the stomach? Just notice. Now, ask yourself quietly, what was I actually feeling in that moment? Not the reaction, the feeling underneath it. Was it hurt, overwhelm, fear, longing? You don't have to solve anything right now. Just noticing the emotion underneath the reaction. That's the beginning of emotional awareness. And the moment awareness appears, the autopilot loosens. And notice something else. The moment you became aware of that feeling, something shifted. even if only slightly, because awareness changes the space inside you. And when the space inside you changes, the space between you and the other person begins to change too. That's the quiet power of emotional awareness. You're no longer reacting automatically, you're present. And presence does something reactions cannot. Presence creates room for curiosity, room for honesty, room for connection. This is how the we begins to come alive again. Not because anyone said the perfect words, but because someone paused long enough to feel what was really happening. And when two people begin speaking from emotion instead of reaction, the conversation changes completely. When two people begin speaking from emotion instead of reaction, the conversation changes completely. When even one person becomes aware of their emotions, something remarkable happens. The entire relational field shifts because awareness slows the nervous system. And when one nervous system slows, the other often follows. The space between people softens. The we becomes more alive again. This is the heart of what we're exploring in the harmony of we, not perfect communication, not flawless behavior, but presence. Emotional awareness isn't something we master once. It's something we return to again and again. Every time we pause, every time we listen inwardly, every time we let the feeling speak before the reaction. In our next episode, we'll explore something that allows emotional awareness to deepen even further: safety. Because vulnerability doesn't happen simply because we try to be brave. It happens when the space between us feels safe enough to soften. Until then, stay curious about what you feel. Your emotions are not obstacles to connection, they are the doorway. See you next time.